Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadowed corridors of Tudor England, where the whispers about a certain royal child may just tangle your thoughts before bedtime. Picture yourself tramping through the chilly stone halls of the palace, the flickering candlelight casting long, wavering shadows on the ancient tapestries. You're close enough to hear the soft murmur of servants and courtiers, yet far enough not to be caught eavesdropping on secrets that probably would have gotten you tossed into the tower, if not worse. Now brace yourself, because you probably won't survive this without wondering, was Queen Elizabeth I's gender identity really what the history books say? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and don't forget to post your location and local time down below. I'm curious where in the world you're falling asleep tonight. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Elizabeth was born on September 7, 1533, to Henry VII and Anne Boleyn, a fact that most school history classes hammer into your head like a relentless drumbeat. But let's look beyond the surface. The royal nursery was far from a sunlit playroom. It was a place steeped in tension, suspicion, and whispered secrets that traveled faster than the courtiers' gossip on a midsummer's eve. You trudge through the castle's corridors, imagining the damp chill of the walls and the musty scent of tapestries stitched with gold thread, silent witnesses to intrigue. Historians agree that Elizabeth's early years were marked by both privilege and peril. As the daughter of a king, notorious for his many marriages and their often bloody ends, Elizabeth's place in the line of succession was as fragile as a candle's flame flickering in a draught. After Anne Boleyn's fall from grace and execution, the infant Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, an event that cast a long shadow over her childhood. But here's where it gets more interesting. Some whispers among the Tudor courtiers hinted that Elizabeth was not quite the daughter everyone assumed. Not in any official records. Mind you, those were tightly controlled by the monarchy. But in private, quiet circles, speculation bubbled. You can almost hear the soft clinking of goblets in a dimly lit chamber where noble ladies exchange glances and hints. Is she really who she seems? One might murmur, voice barely above the crackle of the hearth. You might scoff now, after all. The idea of a royal child's gender being questioned sounds like tabloid fodder of the 16th century. But Tudor England was a world where appearances were everything, and secrets were currency. Historians still argue whether these rumors were born from political rivalry, misunderstandings, or something far more complex. Elizabeth's upbringing was unusual for a princess, too. Unlike her older half-sister Mary, whose path was relatively straightforward, Elizabeth's education and environment were laced with contradictions. She was raised partly by her governess, Catherine Champernowne, who would later become Catherine Ashley, a woman who championed Elizabeth's intelligence and independence, but also instilled in her the importance of courtly decorum. Imagine Elizabeth sitting, cross-legged on a polished wooden floor, poring over Latin texts, her mind wandering between lessons and the more mysterious murmurs of the court. The lessons were rigorous, but her tutors were also mindful of how the princess should appear proper, composed, and above all, fitting a certain ideal of femininity. Yet some fringe tidbits poke through the official narrative like curious roots through cracked stone. For instance, there were reports of Elizabeth displaying behaviors more commonly attributed to boys at the time, enjoying swordplay, displaying a bluntness in speech, and favoring the company of male companions. In an age when gender roles were rigidly enforced, this was not just unusual. It was, well, downright eyebrow-raising. You can almost catch the faint echo of a servant's voice remarking on Elizabeth's masculine spirit, a phrase tossed around in hushed tones, but never put in writing where it might cause scandal. Her mother's legacy, too, cast an enigmatic light. Anne Boleyn was said to possess a sharp wit and a rebellious streak, qualities that Elizabeth seemed to inherit and amplify. But there were darker speculations as well, fueled by the secretive nature of Anne's downfall. Some theorists propose that Anne's own challenges to the established order might have left traces in Elizabeth, manifesting in her complex identity and the way she navigated the thorny political landscape. The idea that Elizabeth might have, consciously or unconsciously, adopted a more fluid sense of self to survive and thrive is a tantalizing puzzle piece. Still, scholars debate how much of this is reading between the lines versus outright conjecture. Picture the court festivities, the masked balls, the elaborate costumes where reality and performance merged seamlessly. In that atmosphere, where identity could be both a mask and a mirror, it's not hard to imagine Elizabeth learning early on how to craft her image with precision and maybe a touch of misdirection. The sensory world around her was rich. The rustle of silk gowns, the scent of beeswax candles, the muffled laughter echoing through marble halls. All these details weave into the fabric of her early life, a backdrop to the secrets that might have been hidden just beneath the surface. The whispers about her gender identity never reached the ears of the common people. It was the palace elite who kept these thoughts alive, each adding their own layer of speculation. Did Elizabeth's deliberate performance of femininity mask something more ambiguous? Were her childhood behaviors a quiet rebellion or an expression of an inner truth? Historians remain divided, their arguments as tangled as the ivy crawling up the palace walls. Some argue these rumors were mere courtly gossip meant to destabilize her claim. Others see them as evidence of a remarkable figure who transcended traditional gender norms. You might imagine Elizabeth as a child caught between worlds, not just daughter and monarch, but between the roles society carved out and the self she was forging. As you let your mind wander through the shadowed nursery halls, the candlelight flickers again, and the lines between history and mystery blur. The more you think about it, the more you realize that this royal child's identity was as carefully crafted and as enigmatic as the jewels she would one day wear. You find yourself drifting down the long, echoing corridors of the Tudor court again, this time trailing the rustle of sumptuous fabrics and the soft thud of Elizabeth's footsteps on cold stone. Imagine the scene: layers of silk and velvet, intricate embroidery catching the candlelight like tiny stars scattered over royal gowns and cloaks. It's a world obsessed with appearances, where every stitch, every fold, and every color whispers secrets about power, status, and sometimes identity. And for Elizabeth, her clothing wasn't just about fashion or protocol. It was a carefully woven part of her story, one that blurred the lines of gender in ways that still have historians scratching their heads. The Tudor court was like a giant theater, and Elizabeth, even as a young woman, was its leading lady, except she wasn't content to play the part assigned to her. Her wardrobe choices subtly defied the era's strict gender codes, causing courtiers to murmur and observers to question what they thought they knew about the Virgin Queen. Picture Elizabeth draped in gowns with broad shoulders padded just enough to suggest strength, or the high collars framing her pale face like armor. The rich fabrics and dazzling jewels weren't just symbols of wealth, they were statements, carefully calculated and endlessly discussed. Mainstream history tells us that Elizabeth adopted the Virgin Queen image as a political tool, an untouchable monarch who embodied the purity and stability of England itself. But there's more lurking beneath the lace and jewels. Some accounts suggest that Elizabeth's costume choices were not merely about enforcing chastity, but about crafting an almost androgynous image, one that combined traditionally masculine and feminine elements to project power and mystery. Imagine a moment when Elizabeth appears at court, her robes trailing behind her like a royal river, but her stance and demeanor suggest something altogether different from the delicate lady-in-waiting stereotype. A fringe tidbit, whispered by a few rare contemporary sources and later picked up by curious historians, tells of Elizabeth wearing what some described as masculine finery, doublets, and hose, or at least elements borrowed from male dress. Now, this wouldn't have been outright scandalous if you were a nobleman, but for a woman, particularly a queen, it was a provocative statement. The fact that she had portraits painted showing her with a ruff that looks almost like a collar on a man's shirt, or sleeves puffed out in a way that could be read as assertive rather than delicate, suggests that Elizabeth was playing with the visual language of gender, pushing boundaries in subtle ways. You can almost feel the fabric textures under your fingers, the smooth silk, the heavy velvet, the crisp linen, each one chosen not just for comfort, but for effect. Elizabeth's clothing was her armor and her stage costume. The way her gowns concealed and revealed, emphasized and softened, sent messages to everyone watching. I am more than a woman. I am a sovereign who commands attention and respect. And in an age when women's power was often limited, this blend of masculine and feminine in her wardrobe was a kind of rebellion wrapped in velvet. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's sartorial choices were a deliberate strategy to craft an ambiguous gender identity, or simply a reflection of Tudor fashion's complexity. Some suggest she was leveraging the power of ambiguity itself, creating a persona that could not be easily pinned down or dismissed. Others think it was all about political image making, designed to keep potential suitors and rivals guessing. Either way, the way Elizabeth dressed wasn't just decoration. It was a carefully honed tool in her royal toolkit. Imagine a secret conversation behind closed doors in the royal chambers. A trusted attendant might whisper, "Her Majesty's gowns have changed again, more bold, more unusual." Another might reply, "She wears her power on her shoulders as much as in her words." The sensory details of those private moments linger: the rustle of fabric, the faint scent of lavender and beeswax from the candles, the dim glow casting shadows that dance like ghosts on the walls. There's also a curious connection to Tudor cross-dressing traditions, a practice that might seem strange to us now, but was surprisingly common in court entertainments and certain rituals. Men sometimes dressed as women for plays. Women occasionally adopted male dress in private or public for specific purposes. Elizabeth's use of clothing that blurred these boundaries fits into a larger cultural context where gender was, at times, performative and fluid. This historical tidbit throws a playful light on the idea that Elizabeth might have consciously adopted elements of male dress to craft her unique identity. You might wonder how such bold fashion choices were received by the public. Officially, the court presented the Queen as the epitome of womanhood, but gossip and rumors, whispered in taverns and noble houses, hinted at a queen who was both a woman and something else, something harder to define. Portraits commissioned during her reign often emphasized her pale complexion and elaborate gowns. But art historians note the presence of masculine symbols like the sword and the strong, almost statuesque poses that suggested power more commonly associated with kings. Elizabeth's penchant for elaborate costume extended to the symbolism woven into her attire. The famous pearl necklaces she wore were more than just jewelry. Pearls symbolized purity, but also had connotations of wisdom and steadfastness, traits that Elizabeth seemed eager to project. At the same time, her garments sometimes included motifs like the Tudor rose or the phoenix, symbols of rebirth and resilience, but also powerful emblems traditionally associated with masculine rulership. The sensory experience of the court's visual spectacle must have been overwhelming. Imagine the gleam of jewels catching sunlight through stained glass windows, the whisper of silk sliding over polished floors, the soft murmur of voices discussing the Queen's latest ensemble. Elizabeth's ability to command attention through her appearance was part theater, part strategy, and part deeply personal expression. And yet, scholars still debate whether these costume choices were part of a conscious gender performance, or merely the product of a queen navigating an intensely male-dominated world. Was Elizabeth deliberately blending masculine and feminine visual cues to obscure her identity? Or was she simply using the tools available to her to assert dominance and defy expectations? The jury is still out, with arguments swirling like the folds of her heavy gowns. You might recall from earlier whispers that Elizabeth's behaviors and mannerisms also challenged gender norms. Combine that with her fashion choices, and a picture emerges of a monarch who wasn't afraid to play with identity in ways that made people uncomfortable, curious, or perhaps even inspired. Whether she was consciously rewriting the script or simply adapting to survive, her wardrobe was a key part of her story, a silent yet powerful language that spoke volumes. As you imagine the Queen moving gracefully through the candlelit halls, her gown brushing against marble, you can almost hear the soft rustle, a sound both regal and intimate. The sensory details, the weight of the fabric, the coolness of the jewels against her skin, the faint scent of perfume mixed with the mustiness of old stone, draw you deeper into the world where clothing was more than fabric. It was identity. So next time you see portraits of Elizabeth I with their stiff collars, elaborate lace, and imposing ruffs, remember they were more than fashion statements. They were a kind of armor and a puzzle, wrapping the Queen in mystery and power. And whether or not she intended to blur gender lines, her clothing whispered secrets that still echo through history, inviting you to look closer, to wonder, and maybe, just maybe, to dream of a queen who was more complex than the history books let on. The court buzzes with anticipation, whispers curling around you like smoke from a candle struggling to stay lit. Elizabeth's carefully constructed image, known far and wide as the Virgin Queen, is the stuff of legend. Yet beneath this polished veneer lies a tangled web of secrets and half-truths that the court dared not speak aloud. You step into the bustling great hall, the heavy tapestries muffling footsteps as courtiers bow and murmur their praises. The public image Elizabeth crafted was more than just a shield. It was a mask that hid far more than her marital status. The Virgin Queen was, by all accounts, a deliberate persona. Elizabeth proclaimed herself married to her kingdom, a vow that resonated deeply in a time when queenship was often tied to male consorts. The legend painted her as an untouchable icon of purity and strength, an image carefully maintained through public appearances, speeches, and letters. But the truth, well, that's where the story turns a shade murkier. As you glide past the heavy oak doors and into the quieter corridors where rumors thrive, you catch fragments of conversations that suggest Elizabeth's virginity might have been more performative than literal. Imagine a slow dance between power and perception, where Elizabeth knew every step and every glance could be weaponized or whispered about behind closed doors. Maintaining the Virgin Queen myth wasn't just about personal choice. It was a political strategy crafted to consolidate power in a male-dominated world. But what if, beneath this public image, Elizabeth was hiding not just a crown of chastity, but a more complex truth about her identity? Some historians suggest the purity narrative was a way to obscure the more ambiguous realities of who she was and who she chose to be. You might find yourself picturing Elizabeth standing alone in her chambers, the flicker of candlelight casting shadows across her face as she contemplates the weight of this public persona. The scent of beeswax candles and faint hints of rosewater fill the air, mixing with the faint rustle of silk. The loneliness of the queen contrasts sharply with the grandiosity of the myth, creating a poignant image of a woman wrapped in both power and solitude. One quirky tidbit that bubbles up from the margins of history involves the imaginary marriage Elizabeth maintained with the idea of England itself. In her speeches, she often personified the kingdom as her husband, a metaphor that blurred personal boundaries and reinforced her sovereignty. It was a clever move, political theater at its finest, that kept suitors at bay and her image untarnished. But some scholars wonder if this symbolic marriage also masked a deeper personal truth, a refusal to fit into the era's narrow definitions of womanhood and marital roles. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's virginity was a genuine personal commitment or a crafted image necessary for survival. Some point to her careful management of suitors and courtship rituals as evidence of her shrewd political mind, using the idea of virginity as a tool rather than a state of being. Others speculate about the emotional and physical dimensions of her life, noting the lack of clear evidence either way leaves the topic open to interpretation. The court itself played a role in maintaining the myth. Courtiers who dared to suggest otherwise risked losing favor or worse. The machinery of rumor and reputation was finely tuned to keep the queen's image immaculate. You can almost hear the polite coughs and sideways glances in the great hall as nobles exchanged coded comments about Elizabeth's chaste reign, while behind the scenes, the truth remained as elusive as the flickering shadows. Elizabeth's own writings add layers to the mystery. Her speeches and letters often emphasize her purity and dedication to England, but there's also a streak of irony and defiance woven into her words. You might catch a subtle wink hidden in a phrase, or the way she carefully balanced vulnerability with authority. It's as if she knew the performance she was putting on and was in full control of every note. Imagine the visual drama of her coronation, the golden crown heavy on her head, the sumptuous robes trailing behind her. The symbolism was clear. Elizabeth was the embodiment of England's strength and virtue. Yet, that same symbolism also cloaked her in an aura of untouchability that raised questions that persist in historical debates today. Was she really the paragon of chastity the public believed? Or was the Virgin Queen myth a glittering disguise, crafted with the precision of a master jeweler? You might smile at the thought of court poets and playwrights trying to capture Elizabeth's enigmatic allure, penning verses that praised her virginity while hinting at a more mysterious essence. The arts became a playground for these layered messages, where Elizabeth's image could be shaped and reshaped to suit political needs. The The sensory world of music, perfume, and candlelight mingled with the spoken word to create an atmosphere where fact and fiction danced cheek to cheek. Of course, the Virgin Queen myth wasn't without its challenges. Potential suitors like Robert Dudley stirred both hope and scandal, their complicated relationship fueling gossip and intrigue. Elizabeth's refusal to marry was both a source of power and vulnerability, a tightrope walk that fascinated and frustrated her contemporaries. The story of Dudley's mysterious wife's death and the rumors surrounding it only added fuel to the fire, keeping the question of Elizabeth's personal life alive in hushed tones. Historians continue to debate whether Elizabeth's abstinence was a personal choice, a political necessity, or a blend of both. Some suggest she may have been asserting control over her own body and destiny in an era when queens were expected to marry and produce heirs. Others read the abstinence as a form of gender expression, a refusal to conform to expected female roles. The evidence is tantalizing, but inconclusive, leaving room for interpretation and imagination. As you wander further through the shadowed palace, you might recall earlier whispers about Elizabeth's clothing and mannerisms, adding layers to the image of a queen who carefully curated every aspect of her identity. The Virgin Queen was not just a woman, she was a performance, a symbol, a puzzle wrapped in finery and mystery. In the end, the myth of the Virgin Queen stands as a testament to Elizabeth's extraordinary ability to navigate a world fraught with danger and expectation. Whether it was a sincere vow or a masterstroke of political theater, it shaped her reign and legacy. And as you settle into the quiet hum of your room, the image of Elizabeth, regal, untouchable, and enigmatic, lingers like the fading notes of a lullaby, inviting you to ponder the secrets beneath the crown. You find yourself leaning in closer, as if you could catch the subtle cadence in Elizabeth's voice and the way her words floated through the heavy air of the Tudor court. The sound is soft but deliberate, every syllable measured, as if she's performing for a crowd of thousands, even when she's alone. Elizabeth's voice and mannerisms set her apart, painting a portrait of a queen who defied the expected norms of femininity in 16th century England. You can almost hear the gentle lilt of her speech, a melody that combined authority and grace, but also hints of something more unusual beneath the surface. Think of the court as a grand theater, where every gesture, every glance carried meaning. Elizabeth's speech was a powerful tool, her voice both commanding and strangely ambiguous, slipping between traditionally male and female inflections. Contemporary accounts describe her speaking with a tone that could shift from softness to steel in an instant, an ability that left listeners both enchanted and unsettled. Some courtiers noted her voice as unusually deep for a woman, while others marveled at her eloquence and sharp wit. Imagine yourself standing nearby, feeling the vibrations of her words as they ripple through the crowded chamber, drawing both admiration and a bit of unease. there's a fascinating mainstream fact that Elizabeth's voice was trained to convey strength and authority, a necessity, in a time when female rulers were often met with skepticism. She spent hours rehearsing speeches, perfecting the balance between warmth and command. But alongside this polished public voice, fringe stories suggest that Elizabeth's natural voice may have been more complex, with some whispering that she possessed a timbre that strayed beyond the typical female range. Could this vocal quality have contributed to the rumors about her gender? It's a question historians still debate. The way Elizabeth carried herself also added to the mystery. Her mannerisms were described as deliberate, precise, sometimes even adopting traits that would have been considered masculine in her time. She stood with a straight posture, moved with calculated grace, and was known to engage in spirited debates with courtiers and diplomats, often adopting a tone of voice and body language that challenged gender expectations. Picture the queen holding court, her hands steady, her gaze sharp, commanding the room with a presence that blended traditional femininity with an unmistakable aura of power. Elizabeth's penchant for adopting a certain stiffness in her posture and her ability to command silence at will suggest a performance tailored to her political needs. She was, after all, navigating a landscape where her gender was constantly scrutinized. In a time when women were expected to be demure and deferential, Elizabeth flipped the script, wielding her voice and mannerisms like weapons to assert her sovereignty. A quirky tidbit that adds flavor to this portrait is the way Elizabeth reportedly mimicked the behaviors of her male courtiers. She is said to have practiced their gestures and speech patterns, not out of mockery, but as a method of mastering court politics. This mimicry could have created a persona that danced on the edge of gender conventions, blurring lines in subtle, provocative ways. Imagine Elizabeth adopting the swagger of a nobleman, the calculated glance of a statesman, all while draped in gowns of the finest silk. Historians still argue whether these vocal and behavioral traits were conscious strategies or simply aspects of Elizabeth's unique personality. Some scholars propose that Elizabeth's voice and mannerisms were a form of gender performance, an early example of fluidity used to consolidate power. Others caution against projecting modern concepts onto a historical figure, emphasizing the need to understand her within her own cultural context. The debate continues, weaving through academic papers like the soft rustle of a silk sleeve. Sensory details enrich this image. The faint echo of Elizabeth's footsteps on polished stone, the subtle scent of lavender in the air, the slight tremor in her voice when she chose to soften it for effect. These elements create an atmosphere where the Queen's identity seems both tangible and elusive, a whispered secret carried on the Tudor breeze. You might recall how this vocal ambiguity complements her wardrobe choices, the broad shoulders of her gowns, the deliberate blending of masculine and feminine visual cues. Together, they paint a picture of a monarch who was not bound by by the strict binaries of her era. Elizabeth's voice and mannerisms were part of a carefully curated performance designed to keep courtiers guessing and rivals wary. The Queen's ability to adapt her speech to different audiences also speaks to her intelligence and political savvy. Whether addressing Parliament, foreign ambassadors, or her own court, Elizabeth modulated her voice to command respect and inspire loyalty. This chameleon-like skill further complicated the straightforward reading of her gender, adding layers to her enigmatic presence. You might smile at the thought of Elizabeth practicing speeches in solitude, her voice shifting effortlessly between tones, experimenting with inflections that would disarm critics and charm allies. The soft candlelight flickers as her voice rises and falls, echoing off the ancient stone walls. In those private moments, perhaps she was aware of the power she wielded, not just as a queen, but as a master of identity itself. The interplay between Elizabeth's vocal presence and her public image invites you to consider how gender is performed and perceived. In an age when voice was a marker of identity, Elizabeth's ability to navigate these waters with such finesse was extraordinary. Her story challenges simple categories and invites you to listen closely to the echoes of history. As you settle deeper into this narrative, the image of Elizabeth's voice, soft yet commanding, familiar yet strange, lingers in your mind like a lullaby sung from the past. The mystery of her identity weaves itself into the very fabric of her reign, a melody that plays on long after the final curtain falls. You slip into the dim glow of Elizabeth's private chambers, where silence wraps around you like a velvet cloak, broken only by the occasional scratch of quill on parchment. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of aged paper, beeswax, and the faint trace of lavender, a calming bouquet that would have soothed a queen burdened with secrets. Here lies one of the most intriguing aspects of Elizabeth's story, her secret correspondences. These cryptic letters and coded notes hint at a complexity beneath the royal veneer, whispers of a hidden identity carefully guarded from prying eyes. Imagine the Queen's hand moving gracefully across the parchment, her quill dancing in delicate strokes as she crafts messages intended for select confidants. These letters were not mere transmissions of political orders or courtly pleasantries. They were often laden with symbolism and coded language that could confound even the sharpest minds. The very act of correspondence was a dance of discretion and trust, especially when rumors about Elizabeth's gender identity swirled like fog around the palace. A well-known historical fact is that Elizabeth was an avid letter writer. Her epistolary exchanges spanning from matters of state to intimate conversations with advisors and close companions. These letters provide a rare glimpse into her thoughts and strategies, though much remains encrypted in metaphor and subtext. But beyond the official documents, scholars have uncovered hints of letters written in ciphers, messages cloaked in allegory, and references so veiled that decoding them has become a pursuit as intricate as unraveling the secrets of the Rosetta Stone. You might picture a late-night scene where Elizabeth, surrounded by flickering candlelight, confides in a trusted scribe or secret messenger. The quill scratches softly, interrupted by the occasional pause as she considers the risks of revealing too much. The tension in the room is palpable. A queen's trust is a rare commodity, and the stakes were nothing less than life and legacy. One quirky tidbit involves a series of letters thought to be written in a private cipher, a system known only to Elizabeth and her closest circle. Some historians speculate these were not merely for diplomatic communication, but served as a means to express personal thoughts that could not be safely shared in plain language. The coded correspondences hint at emotional complexity and possibly even concealed aspects of identity, adding layers to the ongoing debate about Elizabeth's gender. Historians still argue whether these secret letters reveal anything definitive about Elizabeth's true self, or if they are simply an example of prudent royal discretion. The era's political climate demanded secrecy and subtlety, so it's challenging to disentangle coded personal expression from calculated political maneuvering. Nonetheless, the presence of such cryptic communication adds an aura of mystery to Elizabeth's narrative, inviting us to peer deeper into the shadows. Imagine the physical texture of these letters, the rough parchment, the elegant ink that has faded slightly over centuries, the careful folds and seals that protected their contents. Holding such a letter, you'd feel the weight of history and the intimate connection to a queen who lived in a world where words could be weapons and shields alike. Elizabeth's use of secret correspondence also ties into the broader context of Tudor espionage and intrigue. The court was rife with spies, informants, and double agents, so coded communication was essential not only for political strategy, but also for personal safety. It's fascinating to consider how Elizabeth's gender identity rumors might have influenced the content and necessity of such covert messaging. The interplay between these secret letters and Elizabeth's public persona adds a new dimension to her story. On one hand, she projected an image of unassailable purity and strength. On the other, she navigated a labyrinth of hidden meanings and private revelations. This duality makes her one of history's most enigmatic figures, a queen who mastered both the art of public performance and private secrecy. You might recall earlier whispers about Elizabeth's voice and clothing choices. And now, these coded letters weave seamlessly into the tapestry of her carefully managed identity. The sensory experience of the chambers, the soft glow of candlelight, the faint scent of ink, the rustle of parchment grounds the mystery in a tangible world, inviting you to imagine the queen's private moments of reflection and guarded expression. It's tempting to wonder who the recipients of these secret letters were: trusted friends, loyal advisors, or perhaps individuals who understood Elizabeth's more complex sense of self. The secrecy of the correspondences suggests a need for intimacy and understanding beyond the public gaze, a space where the Queen could be both ruler and person. Historians continue to debate the implications of these letters, balancing the evidence with caution and imagination. Were they simply tools of political survival, or do they hint at a more profound narrative about identity and self-expression in a time when both were tightly controlled? The truth remains elusive, wrapped in the folds of ink and parchment, just waiting for a patient mind to unravel. As you drift in this quiet chamber of secrets, the coded words seem to whisper across the centuries, inviting you to listen closely. Elizabeth's private letters are more than just historical documents. They are echoes of a queen's soul, delicate threads connecting past and present in a story that refuses to be fully told. Imagine stepping into a lively Tudor feast, the room buzzing with the hum of voices and clinking goblets, where the air is thick with the scents of roasted meats, spiced wines, and freshly baked bread. Among the merriment, you might spot nobles swapping tales of cross-dressing, a practice far more common than you'd expect in the 16th century. It wasn't just for scandal or rebellion. It was woven into the fabric of court life, entertainment, and even survival. This tradition provides a fascinating backdrop to Elizabeth's own relationship with gender expression, adding nuance to the speculation about her identity. Cross-dressing in Tudor times was complex. Men dressed as women for theatrical performances. Nobles might don disguises for masquerades, and women occasionally took on male roles to navigate restrictive social structures. It was a world where clothing was both costume and camouflage, performance and politics. Elizabeth's possible gender fluidity fits intriguingly into this cultural practice, suggesting she may have drawn from these traditions to craft her unique persona. One well-known historical fact is that cross-dressing was officially frowned upon, but widely practiced, especially in courtly entertainments such as masques and plays. These events blurred the lines between genders on stage, providing a socially sanctioned space for experimentation with identity. Elizabeth, a patron of the arts and an astute political actor, would have been intimately familiar with these performances and their subtexts. You can almost hear the lutes and viols tuning up as courtiers prepare for a masque, where gender roles are playfully inverted. But beyond public spectacles, cross-dressing also had pragmatic and symbolic functions. Women sometimes wore male attire to gain access to spaces and privileges otherwise denied to them, serving as apprentices, traveling safely, or simply exercising autonomy in a rigid society. The possibility that Elizabeth may have embraced elements of this fluidity in her personal life is tantalizing, blurring the boundaries between political necessity and personal identity. There's a quirky tidbit tucked away in the chronicles. Elizabeth reportedly enjoyed disguising herself in various guises, occasionally adopting male attire for secret excursions. While details are sparse and sometimes contradictory, such stories suggest that the Queen was not averse to stepping outside prescribed roles. Imagine Elizabeth slipping into a dark cloak and a man's doublet, the rough fabric unfamiliar, yet empowering, as she moves through the shadowed streets incognito. This act, whether literal or symbolic, plays into the larger narrative of a queen who transcended simple categorization. Historians still argue whether these practices reflect genuine gender fluidity or were strategic performances designed to navigate the dangerous political landscape. Some scholars propose that Elizabeth's use of masculine dress and behavior was a form of coded rebellion against the gender norms that sought to constrain her. Others caution against reading too much into limited evidence, suggesting that any cross-dressing was likely situational rather than an expression of identity. The sensory world of Tudor court life enhances this narrative. The feel of coarse wool against skin, the scent of burning tallow candles mingling with the musky perfume of courtiers, the low murmur of gossip blending with the occasional burst of laughter. These details paint a vivid picture of a culture where appearance and identity were malleable, and where Elizabeth's possible gender expression would have been both a personal and political act. You might think of the court as a stage set, with Elizabeth both director and lead actor, skillfully manipulating costume and performance to maintain power. The line between reality and role-playing was thin, and crossing it could be a matter of survival. Her knowledge of Tudor cross-dressing customs would have equipped her with a subtle toolkit for negotiating her identity in a world that demanded conformity. Consider how this practice ties into earlier sections: Elizabeth's clothing choices, her mannerisms, and secret correspondences, all pieces of a puzzle revealing a monarch comfortable with fluidity and ambiguity. This tradition of cross-dressing adds cultural context, showing that gender in Tudor England was not always rigidly fixed, but often performed and negotiated. There's a poetic symmetry to Elizabeth's story here. A queen who embodied contradictions, whose image oscillated between masculine and feminine, power and vulnerability, public spectacle and private mystery. Her possible embrace of cross-dressing traditions suggests a sophisticated understanding of identity as performance, a concept surprisingly modern in its implications. As the feast continues and the musicians strike up a lively tune, you can almost see Elizabeth moving through the crowd, shifting seamlessly between roles, her attire and demeanor adapting like the flicker of candlelight. In this world of masks and mirrors, she crafts a persona that defies easy definition, inviting you to question the boundaries of gender and power. Historians debate how much of this was a conscious choice and how much was shaped by the constraints of Elizabeth's environment. Regardless, the connection to Tudor cross-dressing customs enriches our understanding of her identity, framing it not as an anomaly, but as part of a broader cultural landscape where gender was both fluid and strategic. You're left with an image of Elizabeth standing at the crossroads of tradition and innovation. Her identity, a tapestry woven from threads of history, performance, and personal agency. And as the music fades into the night, so does the certainty of clear categories, replaced by the gentle ambiguity that makes her story endlessly fascinating. You wander through the shadowy corridors of the palace once more, this time drawn toward the whispers surrounding a figure known only as Master Seymour. His name slips through the cracks of Tudor history like a secret note passed beneath a door, elusive yet persistent. Some say he was a tutor, others suggest a close confidant, and a few fringe theories hint at his influence on Elizabeth's burgeoning sense of self, especially concerning her gender expression. This mysterious presence adds a compelling layer to the already tangled web of Elizabeth's identity. Master Seymour's exact role is a matter of historical debate. What's clear is that the Seymour family was deeply entwined with the Tudor court. Jane Seymour, Henry VII's third wife and mother to Edward VI, brought the Seymours into a prominent position. But Master Seymour remains something of an enigma. Some historians propose that this figure was more than just a courtier or tutor. Perhaps he was a mentor who shaped Elizabeth's understanding of court politics, personal identity, or even gender roles. Imagine Elizabeth as a young woman, seated in a dimly lit chamber where Master Seymour patiently guides her through lessons not just in language and history, but in the subtleties of self-presentation. The air carries the scent of old parchment and ink, mingling with the faint aroma of beeswax candles. Their conversations, though lost to time, might have navigated the delicate topics of how a queen should appear and act, a curriculum as much about survival as scholarship. One mainstream fact is that tutors and mentors played vital roles in shaping royal children's education. But the relationship between Elizabeth and any Master Seymour is less documented and steeped in conjecture. The idea that such a figure influenced Elizabeth's exploration of gender expression remains a fringe but fascinating theory. Perhaps he encouraged her to embrace a more fluid identity as a means of navigating the perilous politics of the court. Some fringe sources even speculate that Master Seymour was a confidant privy to Elizabeth's most guarded secrets, possibly offering guidance on how to craft a persona that defied conventional female roles. Whether these claims hold water is uncertain, but they contribute to the mystique surrounding Elizabeth's formative years. Historians still argue about the existence and impact of this figure. Some dismiss Master Seymour as a composite or a misinterpretation of court records, while others see him as a symbol of the hidden influences shaping Elizabeth's identity. This debate illustrates how gaps in historical records invite speculation, sometimes blurring the line between fact and legend. You can almost hear the subtle whispers that would have surrounded their interactions. Court gossips might have speculated about the unusual closeness between the young princess and this enigmatic mentor. Was he a father figure, a teacher, or something more? The sensory details of those whispered conversations, the quiet rustle of pages, the soft clearing of a throat, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows, evoke a world where trust was scarce and secrets precious. Master Seymour's possible influence also ties back to Elizabeth's later behaviors and mannerisms that challenged gender norms. If he did encourage her to adopt a more fluid sense of self, it would help explain the deliberate blending of masculine and feminine traits she exhibited throughout her reign. Consider how this figure fits into the broader puzzle of Elizabeth's identity, alongside her clothing, voice, secret letters, and engagement with Tudor cross-dressing traditions. He could have been a catalyst, a guiding presence, helping her navigate a world that demanded conformity but rewarded cunning. There's something poetic about the idea of Elizabeth, under Master Seymour's tutelage, learning not just the lettered arts, but the art of becoming. The transformation from princess to queen involved mastering public image, political strategy, and perhaps even gender performance, a curriculum far more complex than mere history or languages. This mysterious figure embodies the hidden forces shaping Elizabeth's identity, reminding you that history is often written in shadows and silences. The spaces between recorded facts invite your imagination to fill in the blanks with stories, both plausible and fantastical. You might recall how previous sections hinted at Elizabeth's deliberate blending of gender traits, and now Master Seymour emerges as a possible architect of that blend. Whether he was real or symbolic, his presence enriches the narrative, adding depth and intrigue to the Queen's enigmatic persona. As you imagine this secret mentor guiding Elizabeth through the labyrinth of court life, the flicker of candlelight dims, and the heavy silence returns. The mystery of Master Seymour lingers, a shadowy thread weaving through the tapestry of Elizabeth's story, inviting you to ponder the unseen influences that shape us all. You drift back into the vibrant pulse of the Tudor court, where portraits hang in ornate frames, each brushstroke a carefully constructed message. Among these, Elizabeth's images stand out, a gallery of carefully curated faces that reveal as much as they conceal. Portraiture in Elizabethan England was not mere art. It was a strategic dance of symbolism and identity, a way for the Queen to shape how she was seen and to shape the very notion of herself. As you gaze into those painted eyes, you feel the weight of the stories behind each canvas, the layers of meaning embedded in color, texture, and pose. The mainstream truth is that Elizabeth commissioned countless portraits during her reign, using them as tools of propaganda and diplomacy. Each painting reinforced the Virgin Queen myth, projecting power, purity, and stability. But a closer look reveals subtle cues that complicate this narrative, details that hint at a more fluid understanding of identity. The way light falls on her face, the choice of garments, even the objects she holds, each element whispers secrets about gender and power. One quirky tidbit involves the recurring appearance of the pelican portrait, where Elizabeth is depicted with a pelican pendant, In Tudor symbolism, the pelican was believed to wound itself to feed its young, a metaphor for self-sacrifice and motherhood. Yet, for the Virgin Queen, this maternal symbol coexisted with other motifs of strength and sovereignty. It's as if Elizabeth's portraits carried dual messages: the traditional femininity of care and sacrifice, intertwined with the masculine authority of rulership. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth used portraiture to deliberately blur gender lines. Some argue that the strong jawlines, broad shoulders, and commanding poses were intentional, projecting a regal masculinity that defied the period's gender norms. Others see these features as the artist's stylized conventions or attempts to flatter the Queen's image. Either way, the portraits functioned as a visual negotiation of identity, inviting viewers to interpret Elizabeth on multiple levels. Imagine standing before one of these portraits in a quiet gallery, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating the canvas. The textures of paint seem almost tangible: the delicate lace of her collar, the glitter of pearls, the intricate embroidery of her gown. You notice the piercing gaze that seems to follow you, a silent challenge to understand the woman behind the image. Elizabeth's portraits often include symbols traditionally associated with male sovereignty: swords, globes, and crowns, juxtaposed with feminine accessories like pearls and delicate lace. This deliberate blending creates a visual language that communicates power transcending gender binaries. It's a form of visual storytelling that supports her unique position as a monarch who embodied both masculine and feminine qualities. A fringe theory suggests that some portraits may have been subtly altered or staged to enhance this ambiguity. Art historians note discrepancies in size, posture, and attire across different versions, leading to speculation that Elizabeth's image was a living canvas, reshaped to suit political needs and personal expression. The idea that her visual identity was as fluid as her verbal and sartorial ones adds another dimension to the mystery. The sensory experience of viewing these portraits extends beyond sight. Imagine the faint scent of oil paint and varnish lingering in the air, the soft rustle of heavy drapes framing the gallery window, the muted footsteps of visitors absorbing the silent power radiating from the canvases. These sensory details ground the portraits in a living world, making Elizabeth's constructed image feel immediate and intimate. You might recall the Queen's vocal qualities and mannerisms discussed earlier, and now see how these visual elements complement her multi-layered persona. The portraits serve as frozen moments of performance, capturing Elizabeth's mastery of self-representation and control over her public image. Consider how portraiture functioned politically. Images were sent abroad as diplomatic gifts, shaping foreign perceptions of England's ruler. Elizabeth's gender-blurring portraits challenged foreign dignitaries' expectations, complicating their understanding of what a queen could be. This visual ambiguity was a strategic asset, reinforcing her authority while keeping rivals uncertain. There's a playful irony in how these portraits served as both windows and mirrors, reflecting the era's gender conventions while simultaneously refracting and distorting them. Elizabeth's image became a puzzle, a royal riddle wrapped in velvet and paint, enticing viewers to look closer and question their assumptions. As you step back from the portrait, the painted eyes seem to hold a secret smile, a knowing glint that acknowledges the ongoing dance between identity and image. Elizabeth's portraits are not just art, they are statements, negotiations, and perhaps even confessions, capturing the essence of a queen who transcended the limits of her time. Historians continue to explore these visual enigmas, balancing evidence and interpretation. What remains clear is that Elizabeth understood the power of image in crafting a lasting legacy. Her portraits invite you to peer beyond the surface and consider the fluidity and complexity of identity, power, and gender in the Tudor age. And as you leave the gallery, the echo of painted eyes lingers, a silent reminder that history is not only written in words, but also painted in shadows and light. You drift into the quieter, more intimate spaces of the palace, where whispered rumors and shadowed glances circulate like a secret current beneath the polished surface of court life. The enigma of Elizabeth's gender and identity didn't just flicker in portraits and performances. It thrived in the hushed corridors, the murmurs of courtiers, and the ever-watchful eyes of foreign ambassadors. These whispers often took on a life of their own, fueled by politics, intrigue, and the human tendency to speculate about what cannot be seen or easily understood. The court was a hotbed of gossip, some trivial, some dangerous, where a misplaced word could topple reputations and even lives. You can almost hear the soft footsteps and suppressed laughter as courtiers exchange stories about the queen's unusual habits, the subtle androgyny of her appearance, or the mysterious closeness she maintained with certain attendants. These whispers weren't merely idle talk, they were threads in a web that shaped perceptions of the monarch, and by extension, the realm itself. A well-established fact is that Elizabeth's court was rife with political intrigue and personal rivalries, where gossip served as both weapon and shield. Courtiers keen to curry favor or undermine rivals would spread rumors, some rooted in truth, others spun from pure invention. Among these, whispers about Elizabeth's gender and identity added a tantalizing twist that fed the court's fascination and anxiety. One particularly quirky tidbit involves a story circulated by foreign diplomats who reported seeing the Queen's wardrobe filled with garments that blended traditionally male and female styles. A claim that, whether true or exaggerated, sparked endless speculation. Imagine the shock of ambassadors trying to reconcile the image of a regal queen with the reports of her donning cloaks and doublets typically reserved for men. Historians still argue how much these rumors reflected reality versus political propaganda. Some suggest that foreign courts used these stories to undermine Elizabeth's authority, painting her as an oddity to be dismissed or controlled. Others see the rumors as a natural consequence of Elizabeth's deliberate blurring of gender roles and her refusal to conform to expected norms. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between, shrouded in layers of intention and interpretation. The sensory texture of these whispered conversations is vivid. The hushed tones behind carved wooden screens, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows on tapestries, the scent of burnt incense mingling with the faint perfume of jasmine and musk. This atmosphere of secrecy and intrigue envelops the Queen's story, making the court feel alive with tension and possibility. You might recall the Queen's use of costume and portraiture as tools of image control, and now see how court gossip functions similarly, an informal yet potent mechanism for shaping identity. Elizabeth's awareness of these whispers likely informed her careful public presentation, a dance of openness and concealment designed to keep her subjects and rivals alike off balance. Consider how the rumors also reflect the anxieties of the time. In a patriarchal society where gender roles were tightly policed, a queen who defied easy classification challenged the social order. Gossip about Elizabeth's gender-blurred lines not just about the monarch herself, but about the very nature of authority and legitimacy. These whispers tapped into deep fears and fascinations, making Elizabeth a figure both revered and questioned. There's a darkly humorous image of courtiers nervously speculating over goblets of wine, their faces flushed with excitement and worry as they try to decode the Queen's identity. The sheer persistence of these rumors, despite official denials, and the Queen's careful management, speaks to the power of narrative and the human desire to fill in gaps with sensational stories. Historians debate the impact of this gossip on Elizabeth's reign. Did it weaken her authority or reinforce it by keeping her enigmatic and untouchable? Some argue that the rumors created a mystique that enhanced her power, while others see them as a source of vulnerability exploited by enemies. This ongoing discussion highlights the complex interplay between image, perception, and power. Imagine for a moment standing at the edge of a palace banquet, overhearing these whispered conversations, the crackle of a fireplace punctuating the murmurs. The uncertainty and fascination in the air create a charged environment where identity is fluid, and nothing is quite as it seems. You might smile at the idea that Elizabeth's reign was shaped not only by laws and battles, but by stories told in secret, by the subtle art of rumor and innuendo. These whispers, like threads in a tapestry, add depth and color to the portrait of a queen who mastered the elusive power of mystery. As you step away from the court's gossip-filled rooms, the echoes of those whispered tales linger, a reminder that history is as much about what is said in shadows as what is recorded in books. Elizabeth's story invites you to listen closely, not just to facts, but to the stories that swirl beneath them, shaping how we understand the past. you find yourself drawn to the quieter, more reflective moments of Elizabeth's life, those rare instances when the Queen stepped away from the glare of court and the demands of rulership to retreat into the sanctuary of her private chambers. It's here, amid the flickering candlelight and the scent of aged parchment, that you begin to grasp the complexity of her inner world, a place where identity was not merely a public performance, but a deeply personal landscape filled with contradictions, yearnings, and guarded secrets. Elizabeth's solitude was not a sign of weakness, but a deliberate choice, a space where she could explore the boundaries of self away from prying eyes. The historical record shows that she often sought refuge in quiet contemplation, surrounded by books, music, and trusted attendants. These moments reveal a queen engaged in an intimate dialogue with herself, navigating the tension between the demands of her role and the mysteries of her own identity. One well-known fact is that Elizabeth was highly educated and deeply invested in the arts and literature, which she used not only as political tools, but also as means of personal expression. Her libraries were vast, filled with works on history, philosophy, poetry, and theology, reflecting a mind that sought to understand the world and her place within it. You can almost see her seated by a window, the soft light illuminating her thoughtful gaze as she turns the pages of a treasured book. But beneath this image of scholarly retreat lies a more enigmatic truth. Some fringe theories suggest that Elizabeth's private writings, some of which have been lost or destroyed, contained reflections on her gender and identity, coded in metaphor and allegory. These texts, if they existed, might have offered a glimpse into her internal struggles and self-perception, revealing a woman who defied simple categorization. Historians still argue about the extent and nature of Elizabeth's private reflections. The surviving letters and documents hint at a rich inner life, but leave much to interpretation. The possibility that Elizabeth grappled with her identity in solitude adds a poignant dimension to her story, humanizing a figure often portrayed as an untouchable icon. Imagine the sensory details of these private moments. The gentle flicker of candle flames casting shadows on tapestries, the faint rustle of silk as Elizabeth moves through her chambers, the subtle aroma of lavender and sandalwood that filled the air. These elements create an intimate atmosphere, inviting you to step closer into the Queen's inner sanctum. You might recall earlier sections discussing Elizabeth's public performances, the carefully crafted image, the strategic use of clothing and voice, and now see how these contrast with her private world. The duality between public persona and private self is a central theme, highlighting the complexity of identity in a world that demanded conformity. Consider how Elizabeth's solitude provided her with the freedom to experiment with gender expression away from the court's watchful gaze. Some scholars speculate that in these moments, she may have explored attire, mannerisms, or even emotional expressions that deviated from her public role. This private fluidity adds depth to the ongoing conversation about her identity. There's a quiet irony in the fact that the queen who ruled a kingdom often found refuge in silence and solitude. These private moments were acts of resistance against the relentless expectations placed upon her, spaces where she could simply be beyond queen, beyond myth, beyond the constraints of gender. The tension between visibility and invisibility permeates Elizabeth's story. Her reign was marked by spectacular public ceremonies and displays of power. Yet, her most profound struggles and expressions may have unfolded in the shadows. This interplay invites you to consider the ways identity is shaped both by external demands and internal truths. As you imagine Elizabeth in these solitary hours, the image is both majestic and tender, a sovereign grappling with the weight of crown and self. The sensory details, the softness of velvet, the flicker of candlelight, the hushed stillness, create a lullaby of sorts, soothing yet complex. Historians continue to explore the nuances of Elizabeth's private life, piecing together fragments from letters, diaries, and third-party accounts. While the full picture remains elusive, the notion of a queen wrestling with identity in solitude resonates deeply, adding humanity to her legend. You might smile at the thought that behind the grand tapestries and golden crowns was a woman who, like anyone else, sought moments of quiet to understand herself. This perspective softens the sharp edges of history, inviting empathy and reflection as you step away from the Queen's private chambers. The gentle hush of solitude lingers in your mind, a reminder that identity is a journey often traveled alone. Even for those who command kingdoms, you glide along the bustling streets of London during Elizabeth's reign, where the pulse of daily life beats beneath the grandeur of the royal court. Among the cobblestones and thatched roofs, the common folk spin tales, some whispered, others shouted in taverns, about the Queen and the enigma surrounding her identity. These stories offer a different lens, one far from the gilded halls, capturing the popular imagination and its mix of awe, suspicion, and curiosity. The public perception of Elizabeth was shaped by more than official proclamations. It was forged in the hearts and minds of ordinary people who saw the Queen as both a distant figure and a symbol of the nation. It's a historical fact that Elizabeth's image was carefully controlled through propaganda. Yet rumors and folk tales flourished, revealing the limits of royal influence over public opinion. One quirky tidbit is the circulation of ballads and street plays that playfully questioned Elizabeth's gender, sometimes portraying her as a warrior king, other times as a mystical figure beyond human categories. Imagine a smoky tavern where a bard strums a lute, singing verses that blend fact and fantasy, blurring lines between queen and legend. These cultural artifacts offer insight into how Elizabeth's identity was negotiated outside the palace walls. Historians still argue about the extent to which these popular narratives influenced or reflected broader attitudes. Some see them as subversive critiques of monarchy and gender norms, while others interpret them as expressions of admiration and national pride. The intersection of folklore and history complicates our understanding of Elizabeth's public identity. The sensory atmosphere of Elizabethan London enriches this picture. The aroma of baking bread mingles with the tang of smoke from hearth fires. The clatter of horse hooves echoes off timber-framed houses. The chatter of merchants and children weaves a tapestry of sound. Within this vibrant milieu, the Queen's image takes on a life of its own, shaped by stories passed from mouth to ear. You might recall earlier sections. Focus on the Queen's carefully curated image and courtly rumors, now juxtaposed against the grassroots narratives of commoners. This contrast highlights the multifaceted nature of identity, one imposed from above, the other shaped by everyday experience. Consider how the folk tales, with their playful ambiguity, allowed people to engage with the complex question of Elizabeth's gender without direct confrontation. These stories provided a space for imagining alternative identities, reflecting societal tensions around gender and power. There's a whimsical charm in imagining these street performances, where humor and satire softened the sharp edges of political commentary. Elizabeth, as both queen and enigma, becomes a character in a living, breathing cultural drama, one that transcends historical record. Historians debate how much these popular narratives affected Elizabeth's reign. Did they undermine her authority, or did they contribute to the mystique that kept her untouchable? The answer is elusive, but the interplay between official and popular identities remains a rich field of inquiry. Picture yourself in a crowded marketplace, listening to a storyteller weaving tales of the Queen's bravery and peculiarities. The crowd's laughter and gasps punctuating the performance. This dynamic storytelling tradition shaped how Elizabeth was understood by those beyond the palace gates. You might smile at the resilience of these folk narratives, which preserved questions of identity and power long after the Queen's death. They remind us that history lives not only in archives, but also in the imaginations of people. As you leave the noisy streets behind, the echo of ballads and whispered tales follows you, a reminder that identity is not just what rulers claim, but what communities create and cherish. You find yourself in the candlelit chambers, where Elizabeth's closest companions moved like shadows, their loyalty and discretion forming a fragile web around the Queen's most intimate secrets. These women and men, advisors, ladies-in-waiting, and servants, were privy to whispers and glances that never reached the broader court or public. They lived in a delicate balance, guarding the Queen's privacy while navigating their own ambitions and fears. A well-documented fact is that Elizabeth relied heavily on her inner circle for both political counsel and personal support. Figures like Robert Dudley, The Earl of Leicester and her trusted ladies, such as Lettice Knollys and Catherine Carey, played complex roles in the Queen's life. But beneath these relationships lay layers of unspoken understanding and possibly shared complicity in maintaining the Queen's carefully guarded identity. Imagine the quiet murmur of voices in these chambers, the rustle of silk gowns, the clink of a teacup, the soft clearing of a throat before a carefully chosen phrase. These small, intimate moments held immense weight. Elizabeth's confidants might have witnessed behaviors and heard thoughts the wider world never saw, forming a secret history behind the public spectacle. One quirky detail is the reported existence of coded signals and private language among Elizabeth's attendants, a kind of spoken cipher designed to communicate without arousing suspicion. These subtle cues might have allowed the Queen and her circle to discuss sensitive topics, including her gender expression, with a degree of safety. Historians still debate how much Elizabeth's inner circle truly understood about her identity, and whether they actively participated in its concealment or exploration. Some suggest that loyalty to the Queen demanded silence, while others propose that her confidants shared a nuanced appreciation of her complexity. The sensory experience in these private chambers is intimate and palpable. The faint scent of rosewater and lavender oils, the softness of velvet cushions, the flicker of candlelight casting warm shadows on tapestry walls. You can almost feel the tension beneath the calm exterior, the weight of secrets kept, and the trust shared in whispered confidences. You might recall earlier discussions of Elizabeth's secret letters and coded correspondence, now seeing how these intimate communications extended into spoken language and daily interactions. The Queen's identity was not only performed on a grand scale, but managed in the minutiae of private relationships. Consider how these private bonds offered Elizabeth a rare space of authenticity, a refuge where she could express facets of herself otherwise hidden. This network of trust underscores the importance of interpersonal dynamics in the construction and maintenance of identity. There's a bittersweet quality to these relationships, the pleasure of connection tempered by the ever-present threat of exposure. Elizabeth's confidants walked a tightrope, balancing devotion with the precarious politics of the Tudor court. Historians debate the emotional dimensions of these bonds. Were they purely political alliances? Or did they include genuine affection and understanding? The lack of explicit records leaves room for interpretation, but the depth of these connections is undeniable. Imagine a late evening in the Queen's chamber, where a trusted lady gently adjusts Elizabeth's attire, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent communication. This small act speaks volumes about intimacy, care, and the unspoken truths shared between them. You might smile at the thought that behind the grandiosity of monarchy lay these tender human moments where identity was negotiated not through proclamations, but through subtle gestures and mutual trust. As you step away from these chambers, the echo of whispered confidences lingers, a reminder that identity is often a shared creation, held safe within the bonds of trust and friendship. You drift through the corridors of power, where religion threads through every decision and every whispered doubt. In Elizabeth's England, faith was not just a personal matter, but a battlefield of allegiance, doctrine, and identity. The Protestant Reformation had upended centuries of tradition, and the Queen's own religious stance was a delicate balancing act, fraught with tension and contradiction. As you step deeper into this world, you realize that Elizabeth's gender identity was entwined with religious expectations and symbolism in ways both subtle and profound. The historical fact is that Elizabeth established the Elizabethan religious settlement, a moderate Protestantism designed to unify her fractured kingdom. This policy navigated between Catholic and Protestant extremes, aiming for peace, but satisfying few completely. Her role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England placed her in a position that carried not only political authority, but spiritual significance. Religion in Elizabeth's time was deeply gendered. The ideal Christian woman was obedient, pure, and submissive, while leadership and authority were generally reserved for men. Elizabeth's unique position as a female monarch challenged these norms, and religious discourse often reflected this tension. Her subjects wrestled with the paradox of a woman embodying divine authority traditionally linked to masculinity. One quirky detail involves the use of religious imagery in Elizabeth's self-presentation. She frequently invoked the Virgin Mary and Christ-like sacrifice, blending feminine purity with masculine strength. Her famous speech to the troops at Tilbury, where she declared she had the heart and stomach of a king, is a vivid example of this synthesis, blending gendered expectations into a singular, powerful identity. Historians still argue about the extent to which Elizabeth's religious persona influenced or obscured her gender identity. Some suggest that her pious public image was a protective veil, masking personal complexities beneath layers of sacred symbolism. Others interpret her religious stance as a genuine fusion of faith and identity, where gender was transcended through spiritual authority. Imagine the sensory world of Elizabethan worship, the echo of hymns in grand cathedrals, the scent of incense mingling with candle smoke, the flicker of stained glass casting colorful patterns on stone walls. These surroundings framed the Queen's reign, where religion and identity were inseparable threads. You might recall earlier discussions of Elizabeth's portraits and public speeches, now seeing how religious symbolism was woven into these performances. The Queen's image was carefully crafted to resonate with religious themes, reinforcing her legitimacy and shaping perceptions of her gender. Consider how this intertwining of religion and gender created both opportunities and constraints. Elizabeth could claim divine right and spiritual leadership, yet she had to navigate a society uncomfortable with female power. Her ability to embody both masculine and feminine religious archetypes was a delicate negotiation. There's a poetic irony in Elizabeth's role as a female sovereign who both embraced and transcended religious gender norms. Her reign invites you to reflect on how faith can be both a source of empowerment and a framework that shapes identity in complex ways. Historians debate the influence of Elizabeth's personal beliefs on her public persona. Was she a devout believer using religion strategically? Or did her faith reflect a deeper internal reconciliation of identity and power? The answers remain elusive but fascinating. You might visualize Elizabeth in a quiet chapel, her figure bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, engaged in private prayer, a moment where the Queen's spiritual and personal identities might merge or diverge in quiet contemplation. The sensory details, the cool stone beneath her feet, the whisper of her prayer, the flicker of candle flames, create a scene of introspection, a pause amidst the demands of rulership. As you leave the chapel, the echoes of hymns and sacred words fade gently, leaving you with a sense of reverence and mystery. Elizabeth's story, intertwined with religion and gender, becomes a tapestry rich with contradiction and grace. You wander into the twilight of Elizabeth's life and reign, a time marked by reflection, uncertainty, and the slow fading of an era. The Queen, once vibrant and commanding, now navigates the complexities of aging, legacy, and the inevitable shadows of mortality. This late stage adds another dimension to the story of her gender and identity, as the pressures of power soften into the quieter questions of selfhood and memory. Historically, Elizabeth ruled for nearly half a century, an impressive tenure marked by both triumph and challenge. As she aged, the public image she carefully crafted faced new tests, the youthful virgin queen giving way to a monarch who bore the visible marks of time. This shift complicated her carefully maintained persona, inviting new interpretations and speculations about her identity. One intriguing detail from this period involves Elizabeth's adoption of increasingly elaborate and heavy clothing, layered with jewels and embroidery, almost armor-like in its complexity. Some scholars interpret this as a way to conceal signs of aging and maintain an aura of unassailable power. Others see it as a symbolic armor, reflecting the Queen's internal struggles with vulnerability and authority. Historians still argue about how Elizabeth's late-life identity performances negotiated the tensions between gender, power, and aging. Did she embrace a more traditionally masculine role of hardened sovereign? Or did she find ways to blend strength and femininity in new ways? The ambiguity adds richness to her legacy. Imagine the sensory details of the Queen's later years. The weight of silk and brocade heavy against her skin, the faint scent of rose and amber lingering in her chambers, the soft rustle of pages as she reads by candlelight. These textures and scents evoke a world where identity is not fixed, but evolves with time. You might recall earlier sections describing Elizabeth's youthful performances of gender, and now see how these evolved or were reinterpreted in her later years. The Queen's image was a living thing, responsive to the demands of age and circumstance. Consider how the public and court reacted to these changes, some with reverence, others with impatience or gossip. The Queen's late life presentations challenged societal expectations about femininity and aging, creating a space for new expressions of identity. There's a poignant irony in the Queen who once declared she had the heart and stomach of a king, now facing the universal vulnerability of growing old. Her late reign invites you to reflect on the interplay between power, identity, and the passage of time. Historians debate the impact of Elizabeth's aging on her political authority and personal identity. Did the visible signs of time weaken her mystique, or did they deepen her humanity and legacy? The answers remain complex and nuanced. You might visualize Elizabeth in her private chambers, seated by a window, gazing out at the gardens she had known for decades, a moment of quiet contemplation, where the layers of public performance peel away to reveal the woman beneath. The sensory experience, the cool evening air, the distant chirp of night birds, the flickering candlelight creates a scene of gentle fading, a soft exhale after decades of intensity. As you leave the Queen's final years behind, the image lingers, a figure both majestic and vulnerable, whose identity was as fluid and enduring as the history she shaped. You step into the quiet aftermath of Elizabeth's reign, where the echoes of her complex identity ripple through history and memory. The Virgin Queen's departure from the stage of power did not close the book on her story. Instead, it opened new chapters of interpretation, debate, and fascination that continue to this day. As you drift through the centuries, you witness how Elizabeth's gender and identity have been reimagined, contested, and celebrated by generations eager to understand the woman behind the crown. The undeniable fact is that Elizabeth I remains one of history's most studied and enigmatic figures, her image enduring in art, literature, and popular culture. Her gender identity, once a subject of court gossip and political maneuvering, has become a lens through which modern scholars explore the fluidity and performativity of gender itself. The Queen's legacy transcends time, inviting you to reflect on the shifting boundaries of identity across eras. One quirky modern tidbit is the growing interest in Elizabeth as a proto-queer icon, embraced by some LGBTQ+ communities for her boundary-defying expressions of gender and power. This contemporary perspective reclaims her story, transforming it from a tale of historical oddity to a celebration of diversity and resilience. Historians still argue about the appropriateness of these modern interpretations. Some caution against projecting contemporary concepts onto the past, while others argue that Elizabeth's life invites precisely such re-examinations. This scholarly debate underscores the ongoing evolution of history as a living dialogue between past and present. Imagine the sensory experience of walking through a modern museum exhibit dedicated to Elizabeth. Soft lighting illuminating portraits, interactive displays inviting reflection, the quiet hum of visitors engaging with history. These spaces create a bridge between centuries, connecting you to the Queen's story in a tangible, immersive way. You might recall the layers of Elizabeth's identity revealed throughout this journey, from her early years shaped by tutors and secrets, through her public performances of power and gender, to the intimate bonds of her inner circle, and finally to the enduring mysteries of her legacy. Each thread weaves together a tapestry, both intricate and incomplete. Consider how Elizabeth's story challenges you to think beyond binary categories and simple narratives. Her life exemplifies the complexities of identity as both personal experience and public construction, shaped by culture, politics, and history. There's a quiet joy in recognizing that Elizabeth's enigma invites continual exploration and reinterpretation. Her story is not fixed, but dynamic, reflecting the evolving ways we understand ourselves and others. Historians and artists alike continue to find inspiration in Elizabeth's life, crafting new stories, analyses, and artworks that keep her legacy alive. The Queen's identity remains a source of fascination, a mirror reflecting our own questions about gender, power, and selfhood. You might imagine closing a book on Elizabeth's story, the soft rustle of pages marking the end of this particular journey. Yet, the questions and mysteries she embodies linger in the air, inviting you to dream, wonder, and keep exploring. As the night deepens and your mind drifts toward sleep, the image of Elizabeth fades gently, her presence, a soothing whisper in the quiet darkness, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to comfort rather than be solved. You find yourself drawn into the intricate dance of court ceremonies, where every gesture, every bow, every whispered word carries weight far beyond the surface. Elizabeth's court was a stage where identity was performed with precision and care, a choreography designed to convey power, control, and perhaps a subtle defiance of expectation. These rituals were more than spectacle. They were a language, a coded conversation about who the Queen was and who she wished to be seen as. The fact is that Elizabeth's court was renowned for its elaborate ceremonies, the accession day tilts, royal progresses, and coronation rituals that reinforced the monarch's supremacy and divine right. These events combined spectacle, pageantry, and political messaging, presenting the Queen as a figure of awe and authority. Yet, within these carefully scripted moments, Elizabeth inserted nuances that challenged traditional gender roles. blurring lines between masculine and feminine expressions of power. One quirky detail involves the Queen's frequent use of the mask motif during court events. She often wore masks or veils, not merely for fashion, but as symbols of mystery and transformation. Imagine the flicker of torchlight on gilded armor, the whisper of silks, and the soft rustle of masks, concealing as much as they revealed. These moments of concealment allowed Elizabeth to control her image in a dynamic way, keeping courtiers and visitors guessing. Historians still argue about how consciously Elizabeth manipulated these ceremonies to craft her gender identity. Some see her as a masterful actress, using ritual to perform an identity that defied easy categorization. Others suggest that these performances were constrained by the rigid expectations of the time, with Elizabeth walking a tightrope between tradition and innovation. The sensory details of these ceremonies are vivid. The scent of fresh flowers and burning incense mingling with the clamor of trumpets and the murmur of the crowd, the shimmer of jewels catching the light as Elizabeth moves through throngs of courtiers, the cool stone of the throne beneath her as she takes her place. These elements create an immersive atmosphere where identity is as much about presence and perception as about any fixed truth. You might recall earlier sections describing Elizabeth's portraits and public speeches, and now see how these live performances complemented those static images. The Queen's identity was not only painted on canvases or written in words, but enacted in rituals that engaged all the senses. Consider the delicate balance Elizabeth maintained, projecting strength and authority without alienating a court and nation unaccustomed to female rule. Her ceremonies embraced symbols of masculinity, like the sword and crown, while also drawing on feminine virtues of purity and grace. This fusion created a unique royal identity that was at once commanding and enigmatic. There's a gentle humor in imagining the courtiers' reactions, some awestruck, others nervously trying to decode the Queen's intentions. The mask motif, for example, might have sparked whispered debates about what Elizabeth was hiding or revealing. The playful ambiguity kept the court attentive and the Queen in control. Historians debate whether these performances allowed Elizabeth genuine self-expression or were necessary adaptations to survive in a male-dominated political landscape. The answer is likely both. Her ceremonies were acts of survival and art, blending necessity with creativity. Imagine standing in the midst of a royal procession, the air thick with anticipation, and the mingled scents of leather, perfume, and burning torches. The Queen passes by, regal and inscrutable, her image crafted with deliberate care. Every glance she casts, every smile she offers, is part of a silent dialogue with her audience. You might smile at the thought that behind the grandeur and ceremony lay a woman fully aware of the power of performance, using it not just to rule, but to rewrite the rules themselves. Elizabeth's court was a theater where identity was both a mask and a mirror. reflecting the complexities of power, gender, and self. As you step back from the spectacle, the echoes of trumpets and whispered speculation fade, leaving you with a sense of the delicate artistry involved in crafting a reign that was as much about image as it was about policy. You settle into the quiet moments behind the palace doors, where Elizabeth's personal relationships reveal a complex interplay of affection, power, and identity. Unlike the grand displays of court ceremony, these connections offer a more intimate portrait of the Queen, a glimpse into the human being navigating loyalty, desire, and the politics of companionship. These relationships, fraught with tension and tenderness, provide fertile ground to explore how Elizabeth's identity was lived and experienced in private. It's a historical fact that Elizabeth's closest relationships, particularly with men like Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, and later Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, were the subject of intense scrutiny and speculation. While Elizabeth never married, her courtships and friendships shaped her political strategies and public image. The ambiguity surrounding these relationships adds layers to our understanding of her identity, blending the personal and the political in ways that challenge simple narratives. One quirky tidbit involves Elizabeth's habit of gifting her favorites with lavish presents, jewelry, portraits, and sometimes symbolic tokens loaded with meaning. These gifts were not just signs of favor, but part of a subtle language of intimacy and power. Imagine receiving a miniature portrait of the Queen, painted with such detail that it felt like holding a secret piece of her essence. Historians still debate the true nature of Elizabeth's feelings toward her favorites, and whether these relationships crossed the boundary into romance or remained politically strategic alliances. This ongoing conversation reflects broader questions about the nature of affection, sexuality, and identity in a historical context that differs significantly from our own. The sensory world of these private relationships is rich and textured. The soft rustle of silk gowns in shadowed chambers, the scent of rosewater mingling with tobacco smoke, the quiet clink of glasses during secretive conversations. These moments contrast sharply with the public spectacles, offering a more nuanced view of the Queen's lived experience. You might recall earlier sections where Elizabeth's public persona was crafted with deliberate ambiguity, and now see how her private connections both reinforced and complicated this image. The Queen's identity was not static, but constantly negotiated through interactions with those closest to her. Consider the emotional labor involved in maintaining these relationships, the balance of intimacy and distance, trust and suspicion, affection and political calculation. Elizabeth's role as monarch added layers of complexity to what might otherwise be simple human connections. There's a subtle humor in imagining the courtiers' reactions to Elizabeth's favorites, jealous glances, whispered rivalries, and the ever-present awareness that to be close to the Queen was to dance on a knife's edge. The Queen's favorites were both blessed and burdened, symbols of her favor and targets of envy. Historians debate how much these relationships influenced Elizabeth's policies and decisions. Did affection soften her rule, or did political necessity override personal feeling? The interplay between personal identity and political strategy is a rich area for exploration. Picture Elizabeth seated in a quiet room, exchanging a knowing smile with a trusted favorite, the flicker of candlelight casting soft shadows on their faces. This intimate scene reveals the human side of a monarch, often seen as distant and inscrutable. You might smile at the thought that beneath the crown and robes was a woman navigating the complexities of love and loyalty, power and vulnerability. Elizabeth's relationships remind us that identity is lived in connection with others, shaped by both public roles and private emotions. As you leave these quiet chambers, the echoes of whispered confidences and unspoken desires linger, a reminder that the story of identity is as much about the heart as it is about history. You are pulled into the lively, often chaotic world of Elizabeth's international diplomacy, where identity, both personal and national, was constantly negotiated across borders and courts. The Queen's interactions with foreign ambassadors and rulers were not mere formalities, but complex performances shaped by politics, culture, and the ever-present question of her gender and authority. In these encounters, Elizabeth's identity became a diplomatic tool and a site of contestation, revealing the layered dynamics of power on the global stage. The historical fact is that Elizabeth's reign coincided with a period of intense geopolitical tension. England was emerging as a naval power, and its relations with Spain, France, and other European states were fraught with conflict and alliance building. Elizabeth's gender-complicated diplomatic protocols. Foreign courts were accustomed to male monarchs and often struggled to place a reigning queen in their traditional frameworks. One quirky detail involves the practice of foreign ambassadors sending lavish gifts that sometimes seemed designed less for generosity than to test the Queen's identity or provoke a reaction. Tales circulate of gifts that were oddly gendered: a sword wrapped in lace, a jewel-encrusted glove, or even a saddle embroidered with roses, each a symbol laden with meaning and potential insult or flattery. Historians still debate how Elizabeth navigated these diplomatic performances. Was she deliberately playing with expectations to unsettle rivals, or was she constrained by the rigid gender norms of her time? The answer likely lies in a sophisticated blend of both, with Elizabeth wielding ambiguity as a diplomatic advantage. You can almost hear the clink of fine china during formal dinners, the low murmur of courtiers translating and interpreting every gesture and phrase. The air is heavy, with perfumes patchouli, amber, and the occasional waft of burnt wood from a nearby hearth. This sensory environment heightens the tension and theatricality of diplomatic encounters. Recall earlier scenes of Elizabeth's courtly performances and private moments. Now you see how these personal identity negotiations extended outward, shaping England's place in the world. The Queen's image was not only for her subjects, but for an international audience attuned to every signal. Consider the strategic use of costume and posture in diplomatic meetings. Elizabeth would select attire that blended masculine authority with feminine grace, wearing sumptuous gowns with armored corsets beneath, an embodiment of both warrior and sovereign. This deliberate presentation sent messages as powerful as any treaty or speech. There's an amusing image of foreign diplomats whispering among themselves, trying to decode the Queen's identity through her wardrobe and mannerisms, perhaps questioning if they were dealing with a king in disguise or a queen beyond their understanding. Such confusion worked in Elizabeth's favor, allowing her to maintain control. Historians debate the effectiveness of this strategy. Some argue it was essential to preserving England's sovereignty, while others suggest it risked alienating potential allies. The interplay of gender, identity, and diplomacy remains a fascinating puzzle. Imagine yourself at a royal reception, the room filled with noble guests clad in velvets and silks, their eyes flickering between curiosity and caution as the Queen makes her entrance. Every glance, every nod is a move in a delicate dance of power and perception. You might smile at the thought that Elizabeth's gender ambiguity was not a weakness, but a cunning diplomatic asset, a secret weapon in a world dominated by patriarchal rulers. Her ability to confound expectations allowed her to keep enemies guessing and allies intrigued. As you step away from the foreign courts and their elaborate rituals, the echoes of political intrigue and cultural negotiation linger, a reminder that identity is as much a tool of statecraft as it is a personal journey. You drift back into the quiet intensity of Elizabeth's correspondence, where the written word became both a shield and a sword. Her letters, penned with care and sometimes sharp wit, reveal a monarch who mastered the art of communication, not just to govern, but to craft and conceal her identity. In these missives, you sense the private voice behind the public image, a voice that negotiates power, gender, and selfhood through ink and parchment. A well-established fact is that Elizabeth's letters were numerous and varied, ranging from formal state documents to personal notes to favorites and foreign rulers. Her style was often indirect, layered with metaphor and allusion, a way of controlling information and emotion. Through letters, she could project authority while maintaining a deliberate ambiguity, especially about matters of identity. One quirky detail involves the secret codes and ciphers Elizabeth sometimes employed in her correspondence. These encrypted messages allowed her to discuss sensitive topics without fear of interception, a practice that hints at the importance of secrecy surrounding her personal identity and political intentions. Imagine decoding a letter where every word holds a double meaning, a hidden layer beneath the surface. Historians still argue about how much Elizabeth's letters reveal her true feelings or identity versus how much was performance and political necessity. Some interpret certain phrases as hints at deeper personal struggles, while others caution against reading too much into carefully crafted rhetoric. The sensory world of these letters is tactile and intimate. The rough texture of parchment, the faint smell of ink and beeswax from sealing wax, the delicate strokes of a quill pen guided by practiced hands. Each letter is a physical connection across distance and time, carrying the Queen's voice into unknown hands. You might recall earlier reflections on Elizabeth's public performances and private relationships, now seeing her correspondence as another arena where identity was constructed and contested. The letters functioned as extensions of her selfhood, reaching beyond the confines of the court. Consider the emotional and strategic complexity involved in letter writing, balancing openness and secrecy, affection and authority, truth and deception. Elizabeth's mastery of this art allowed her to maintain control over how she was perceived. There's a quiet humor in imagining the reactions of recipients trying to interpret the Queen's tone and intentions. Was she being affectionate, commanding, playful, or all three at once? The ambiguity kept them attentive and guessing. Historians debate the extent to which Elizabeth's letters provide insight into her gender identity, or coded references to strength and heart, mere political language, or subtle revelations of her self-perception. The ambiguity remains a fascinating puzzle. Picture yourself holding one of these letters, feeling the weight of history in the paper, tracing the elegant script, and imagining the moment of its writing. Perhaps late at night, the Queen alone with her thoughts and fears. You might smile at the thought that behind the grandeur and myth was a woman using words not only to rule, but to protect and express parts of herself unseen by the world. Elizabeth's correspondence is a testament to the power of language in shaping identity. As you set the letter aside, the silence fills with unspoken words and hidden meanings, a reminder that identity is often a secret conversation, carried quietly between hearts and minds. You slip into the shadows cast by Elizabeth's portraits, where every brushstroke and detail whispers secrets about identity, power, and perception. These paintings were more than mere likenesses. They were carefully orchestrated images, crafted to project the Queen's complex persona and influence how she was remembered. As you gaze into these painted eyes, you realize the portraits are as much performances as the court ceremonies, revealing the interplay between public image and private self. It's a well-known historical fact that Elizabeth commissioned numerous portraits throughout her reign, each designed to convey specific messages to different audiences. The Darnley portrait, for instance, shows a youthful, radiant queen, while later images, like the Armada portrait, celebrate her as a victorious, almost mythic figure. These images were distributed widely, shaping the public's understanding of her identity. One quirky detail is the use of symbolic elements, like the globe under Elizabeth's hand in the Armada portrait, signaling her dominion over the world, or the pearls adorning her neck, often interpreted as symbols of purity and chastity. The attention to detail in these portraits created layers of meaning, inviting viewers to read beyond the surface. Historians still argue about how much these portraits reflect the Queen's actual appearance versus idealized or political imagery. Some suggest that the Queen actively participated in designing her image, while others see the artists as the primary creators of her visual identity. The sensory experience of these portraits is rich. The glossy finish of oil paint, the subtle texture of canvas, the flickering gallery lights that animate colors and shadows. Standing before these works, you feel the weight of history pressing gently, yet insistently, inviting contemplation. You might remember earlier discussions about Elizabeth's court rituals and correspondence, now recognizing how portraiture complemented these forms of self-presentation. Together, they formed a multimedia narrative, telling a story of power, gender, and identity. Consider the tension between visibility and concealment in these images. While they reveal much, they also obscure, presenting a controlled version of the Queen that served political ends. This duality mirrors Elizabeth's own navigation of her public and private selves. There's a wry amusement in imagining how courtiers and foreign dignitaries reacted to receiving these portraits, some marveling at their artistry, others scrutinizing every detail for hidden messages. The portraits were diplomatic gifts, tools of influence as much as art. Historians debate whether these images helped sustain Elizabeth's authority or contributed to myths that complicated historical understanding. The ongoing reinterpretation of these portraits reveals how visual culture shapes collective memory. Picture yourself standing before the famous rainbow portrait, with its enigmatic gaze and intricate symbolism. The Queen's eyes seem to follow you, challenging and inviting interpretation, a reminder that identity is both seen and unseen, revealed and concealed. You might smile at the thought that through these painted faces, Elizabeth continues to speak across the centuries. Her identity, an unfinished conversation between artist, subject, and viewer. As you step away from the gallery, the images linger in your minds, eye color, light, and shadow, merging into a tapestry of history, mystery, and human complexity. You step gently into the quiet twilight of Elizabeth's final years, where the weight of time and the inevitability of mortality cast a softer, more reflective light on her complex identity. This closing chapter reveals a monarch who, after decades of performance and power, faced the personal and political challenges of aging, legacy, and the unknown future. As you move through these moments, you sense the blending of strength and vulnerability, the enduring mystery of a queen whose identity was as fluid at the end as it had been at the beginning. A concrete historical fact is that Elizabeth died in 1603 after a reign of 45 years, leaving no direct heir. Her passing marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart era under James. The Queen's death was met with profound mourning, but also uncertainty about the future of the realm she had shaped so meticulously. One quirky detail involves the Queen's reported refusal to see her successor or discuss the succession openly. Stories suggest she maintained control over her image and narrative to the very end, keeping her identity and authority intact in the face of inevitable change. Imagine the quiet rooms of Whitehall filled with whispered speculation, the heavy curtains drawn against the outside world. Historians still debate the extent to which Elizabeth's gender and identity influenced her decisions in these final years, including her reluctance to marry or name an heir. Some view her choices as deeply personal acts of self-preservation, others as political strategy, and many as inseparable blends of both. The sensory atmosphere of Elizabeth's last days is muted and intimate, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows, the soft rustle of silk bed curtains, the faint scent of herbs used to ease discomfort. These details create a space of contemplation and closure, a stark contrast to the vibrant courtly life she had led. You might recall the numerous performances and carefully crafted images that defined Elizabeth's reign, now recognizing how her final years reveal the human costs and complexities behind the legend. Identity, you realize, is not fixed, but evolves even in the face of death. Consider the psychological and emotional landscape of a queen who had embodied power for so long, now confronting the silence that follows. The tension between public expectation and private reality becomes palpable, inviting empathy and reflection. There's a subtle humor in imagining Elizabeth's characteristic wit and resolve persisting despite frailty, perhaps a sharp comment or a mischievous glance, even as her strength waned. Such moments humanize the mythic figure. Historians debate the interpretations of Elizabeth's legacy, questioning how much her identity as a woman, a monarch, and a symbol shaped the England she left behind. Her reign is studied not only for political achievements, but for its profound cultural and symbolic resonance. Picture yourself standing by the Queen's bedside in those final hours, the room heavy with unspoken emotions and the weight of history. The Queen's eyes, once fiery and commanding, now soft with contemplation, hold the mysteries of a life lived in full view, yet forever partly hidden. You might smile at the thought that Elizabeth's identity, like a finely woven tapestry, includes threads of power, performance, humanity, and enigma. An unfinished story that continues to inspire and intrigue. As the night deepens and the candlelight flickers low, you feel a gentle, quiet settling over the narrative, a soft close to a journey that has spanned centuries and invited endless wonder. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As we come to the close of this long and winding story, remember that history is less about absolute answers and more about the questions we ask. Elizabeth's life teaches us that identity is a fluid, evolving dance, never fixed, always fascinating. Her story invites you to embrace complexity, to find comfort in mystery, and to celebrate the human capacity for reinvention. Thank you for joining this slow, gentle exploration of the Virgin Queen's true gender and identity. May the echoes of her story lull you into restful dreams and inspire quiet reflection. Until next time, rest well and sweet dreams.